Chapter 7 Mudblood and Murmurs. Harry spent a lot of time over the next few days dodging out of the sight whenever he saw Gilderoy Lockhart. Coming down a corridor, Harry had harder to avoid was Colin Creevey, who seemed to have memorized Harry's timetable. Nothing seemed to give Colin a bigger thrill than to say, "All right, Harry," or 6 or 7 times a day, and hear, "Hello, Colin, back." However exasperated Harry sounded when he said it. Hedwig was still angry with Harry about the distracted car journey, and Ron Wong was still malfunctioning, surpassing itself on Friday morning by shooting out of on hand and charms and hitting tiny old Professor Flitwick squarely between the eyes, creating large throbbing green boil where it struck. So with one thing and another, Harry was quite glad to reach the weekend. He, Ron, and Hermione were planning to visit Hagrid on Saturday morning. Would have liked by Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. "What's the matter?" said Harry grudgingly. "Quidditch practice?" said Wood. "Come on!" Harry squinted at the window. There was a thin mist hanging across the pink and gold sky. Now he was awake. He couldn't understand how he could have slept through the racket the bird were making. "Oliver," Harry croaked, "it's the crack of dawn." "Exactly," said Wood. He was a tall and burly 6 years, and at the moment his eyes were gleaming with a mad atheism. "It's a part of our new training program. Come on, grab your broom and let's go," said Wood heartily. "None of the other team have started training yet, so we're going to be the first of the mark this year's." Yawning and shivering slightly, Harry climbed out of bed and tried to find his Quidditch robe. "Good man," said Wood. "Meet you on the pitch in 15 minutes." When he'd found his scarlet team robe and pulled on his cloak for warmth, Harry scribbled a note to Ron explaining where he had gone and went down the spiral staircase to the common room. His Nimbus 2000 on his shoulder. He had just reached the portrait hole when there was a clatter behind him, and Colin Creevey came dashing down the stiff spiral staircase. His camera was swinging madly around his neck and something clutching in his hand. "I heard someone saying your name on the stair, Harry. Look what I've got. I've had a envelope I wanted to show you." Harry looked busily at the photograph Colin was brandishing on his nose. A moving black and white locker was tugging hard on an arm Harry recognized as his own. He was pleased to see that his photograph of himself was putting up a good fight and refusing to be dragged into the view. As Harry watched, Lockhart gave up and slumped painting against the white edge of the picture. "Will you sign it?" said Colin eagerly. "No," said Harry flatly, glancing around to check that the room was really deserted. "Sorry, Colin, I'm in a hurry. Quidditch practice." He climbed through the portrait hole. "Oh, wait for me. I've never watched a Quidditch game before." Colin scrambled through the hole after him. It'll be really boring," Harry said quickly, but Colin ignored him, his face shining with excitement. "You were the youngest house player in 100 years, weren't you, Harry?" "Weren't you?" said Colin, trotting alongside him. "You must be brilliant. I've never flown. Is it easy? Is that your own broomstick? Is that the best one there is?" Harry didn't know how to get rid of him. It was like having an extremely talkative shadow. "I don't really understand Quidditch," said Colin breathlessly. Is it true there are 4 balls and 2 of them fly around trying to knock people off their broom?" "Yes," said Harry heavily, resigned, explaining the complicated rule of Quidditch. "They'll call the bludger. There are 2 beaters on each team who carry a club to beat the bludger away to their side. Fred and George Weasley are Gryffindor beater." "And what are the other ball for?" said Colin asked, tripping down a cobbled step because he was gazing open-mouthed at Harry. "Well, the quaffle, that's the biggest red one, is the one that scored goal. 3 chasers on each team throw the quaffle to each other and try and get it through a goal post at the end of the pitch. There are 3 long poles with hoops on the end, and the 4th ball is the golden snitch, said Harry. It's very small and very fast and difficult to catch, but that's what the seeker got to do, because a game of Quidditch doesn't end until the snitch has been caught. And whichever team seeker gets the snitch earns his team an extra 150 points. And your Gryffindor seeker and your a Gryffindor seeker, aren't you? Said Cullen. Yes, said Harry as they left the castle and started across the dawn-drenched grass. And there's the keeper, too. He guards the goalpost. That's it, really. But Colin didn't stop questioning her all the way down the sloping lawn to the Quidditch pitch, and Harry only shook him off when he reached the changing room. Colin called after him in a piping voice, "I'll go and get a good seat, Harry," and hurried off to the stand. The rest of the Gryffindor team were already in the changing room. Wood was the only person who looked truly awake. Fred and George Weasley were sitting puffy-eyed and tousled-haired next to fourth-year Alyssa Spinnet, who seemed to be nodding up against the wall behind her. Her fellow chaser, Katie Bell, and Angela Johnson were yawning side by side opposite them. There you are, Harry. What kept you?" said Wood briskly. "Now, I wanted a quick talk with you all before we could actually get into the pitch, because I spent the summer devising a whole new training program, which I really think will make all the difference." Wood was holding up a large diagram of Quidditch pitch, on which were drawn many line, arrow, and cross in a different colored ink. He took out his wand, tapped the board, and arrow began to wiggle over the diagram like caterpillars as Wood launched into speech about his new tactics. Fred Weasley had dropped right into Alice's Spinnet's shoulder, and he began to snore. The first board took nearly 20 minutes to explain, but there was another board under that, and third under that one. Harry sank in a stupor as Wood droned on and on. "So," said Wood at long last, jerking her from wistful fantasy about what he could be eating for breakfast at this very moment up at the castle. "Is that clear? Any question?" "I've got a question, Oliver," said George, who had been woken up with a start. "Why couldn't you have told us all this yesterday when we were awake?" Wood was pleased. "Now listen here, you lot," he said, glaring up at them all. "We should have won the Quidditch Cup last year. We're easily the best team, but unfortunately, owning the circumstance beyond our control." Harry shifted guiltily at his seat. He had been unconsciousness in the hospital waiting for a final match for the previous years, meaning that Gryffindor had been a player short and had suffered their worst defeat in 300 years. Harry shifted guiltily in the seat. He had been unconscious. Wood took a moment to regain control of himself. Their last defeat was clearly still torturing him. "So this year we train harder than ever before. Okay, let's go and put our new theories into practice," Woods shouted, seizing his broomstick and leading the way out of the changing room. Stiff-legged and still yawning, his team followed. They had been in the changing room so long that the sun was up properly now. All the remnant of mist hung over the grass in the stadium. As Harry walked onto the pitch, he saw Ron and Hermione sitting in the sand. "Aren't you finished yet?" called Ron incredulously. "Haven't even started," said Harry, looking gently at the toasted marble Ron and Hermione had brought out of the great hall. Would have been teaching us new move. He managed the broomstick and kicked out the ground, soaring up in the air. The cool morning air whipped his face, waking him far more effectively than would long talk. It felt wonderful to be back on the Quidditch pitch. He soared right around the stadium at full speed, racing Fred and George. "And what's that funny clicking noise?" called Fred as they hurtled around the corner. Harry looked in the stand. Colin was sitting on one of the highest seats, his camera eyes taking picture after picture. The sound strangely magnified in Desert Sea. "Look this way, Harry! This way!" he cried shrilly. "Who's that?" said Fred. "No idea," Harry lied, putting on a spurt of speed that took him as far as possible from Colin. "What's going on?" said Wood, frowning as he skimmed through the air toward them. "Why, that first year taking picture. I don't like it. He could be a Slytherin spy trying to find out about our new training program. He's in Gryffindor," said Harry quickly. "And the Slytherin don't need a spy, Oliver," said George. "What makes you say that?" said Wood testily. "Because they're here in person," said George, pointing. Several people in the green robe were walking onto the pitch, broomstick in their hand. "I don't believe it," Wood hissed in outrage. "I booked the pitch for today. We'll see about this." Wood shot toward the ground, landing rather harder than meant in his anger. Staggering slightly, he dismounted. Harry and Fred and George followed. "Flint," Wood bellowed, the Slytherin captain, "this is our practice time. We've got specially. You can clear off now." Marcus Flint was even larger than Wood. He has a look of trollingly cunning on his face as he replied, "Plenty of room for all of us. For all of us, Wood." Angela, Alyssa, and Katie had come over too. There were no girls on Slytherin team who stood shoulder to shoulder, facing Gryffindor, leering to a man. "But I booked the pitch," said Wood positively, spitting with rage. "I book it." "Ah," said Flint, "but I've got a specially signed note here from Professor Snape. Professor Severus Snape, gave the Slytherin team permission to practice day on the Quidditch pitch, owing to the need of training their new seeker." "You've got their new seeker?" said Wood, distracted. "Where?" And from behind the six large figure before them came a seventh smaller boy, smirking all over his pale, pointed face. It was Draco Malfoy. "Aren't you Lucius Malfoy's son?" said Fred, looking at Malfoy with dislike. "Funny you would mention Draco father," said Flint, as the who's Slytherin smiled still more broadly. "Let me show you this generous gift he made to the Slytherin team." All seven of them held their broomstick, seven highly polished, brand new handles, and seven set of fine gold lettering spelling the word Nimbus 2001 gleamed under the Gryffindor nose in the early morning sun. "Very latest model, only came out last month," said Flint carelessly, flicking a speck of dust from the end of his own. "I believe it outstripped the old 2000 series by a considerable amount. As for the old clean sweep," he smiled nastily as Fred and George, who were both clutching clean sweep 5, sweep the board with them. None of the Gryffindor team could think of anything to say for a moment. Malfoy was smirking so broadly as his cold eye reduced his slit. "Oh, look," said Flint. "A pitch invasion!" Ron and Hermione were crossing the grass to see what was going on. "What's happening?" Ron asked Harry. "Why are you playing? And what he's doing here?" He was looking at Malfoy, taking in his Slytherin Quidditch robe. "I'm the new Slytherin seeker, Weasley," said Malfoy, smuggling. "Everyone just been admiring the broom my father brought for our team." Ron gasped. Ron gaped open-mouthed at the seventh Super Bee broomstick in front of him. "Good, aren't they?" said Malfoy smoothly. "But perhaps the Gryffindor team will be able to raise some gold and get a new brooms too. You could raffle off those clean sweep 5. Expect museum would bid for them." The Slytherin team howled with laughter. "At least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in," said Hermione sharply. They got in on pure talent." The smug look on Malfoy's face flickered. "No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood," he said, "bat." Harry knew at once that Malfoy had said something really bad, because there was an instant uproar at this word. Flint had to dive in front of Malfoy to stop Fred and George jumping on him. Alice shrieked, "How dare you!" And Ron flung his hand into his robe, pulled his wand, yelling, "You'll pay for that one, Malfoy!" and pointed it fiercely under Flint's arm, and Malfoy faces. A loud bang echoed from the stadium, and a jet of green light shot out of Ron's wand, hitting him in the stomach and sending him reeling backward onto the grass. "Ron, are you all right?" squealed Hermione. Ron opened his mouth to speak, but no one came out. Instead, he gave us a mighty belch as several slugs dribbled out of his mouth on his lap. The Slytherin team were paralyzed with laughter. Flint was doubled up, hanging on his new broomstick for support. Malfoy was on all fours, banging the ground with his fist. The Gryffindor would gather around Ron, who kept belching a large glistening slug. Nobody seemed to want to touch him. "We'd better get him to Hagrid. It's nearest," said Harry to Hermione, who nodded bravely, and the pair of them pulled Ron up by arms. "What happened, Harry? What happened? Is he ill? But you can cure him, can't you?" "But you can cure him, can't you?" Colin had run down his seat and was now dancing alongside as they left the pitch. Ron gave a huge heave and more slug dribbled out of his front. "Ooh," said Colin, fascinated, raising his camera. "Can you hold him still, Carrie?" "Get out of the way, Colin," said Harry angrily. He and Hermione supported Ron out of the stadium and across his ground toward the edge of the forest. "Nearly there, Ron," said Hermione as the gamekeeper cabin came to. "You'll be all right in a minute. Almost there." They were within 20 feet of Hagrid's house when the front door opened, but it wasn't Hagrid who emerged. Gilderoy Lockhart, wearing a robe of palest mauve today, came striding out. "Quick, behind there!" Harry hissed, dragging Ron behind a nearby bush. Hermione followed, somewhat reluctantly. "It's a simple matter if you know what you're doing," Lockhart was saying aloud to Hagrid. "If you need help, you know where I am. I'll let you have a copy of my book. I'm surprised you haven't already got one. I'll sign one tonight and send it over. Well, goodbye." And he strode away toward the castle. Harry waited until Lockhart was out of sight, then pulled Ron out of the bush and up to Hagrid's front door. They knocked urgently. Hagrid's appearance at well, looking very grumpy, but his expression brightened when he saw who it was. "Been wondering when you'd come to see me." Come in. Thought you might have been Professor Lockhart back again." Harry and Hermione supported Ron over the threshold into the one-room cabin, which had an enormous bed in one corner, a fire crackling merely another. Hagrid didn't seem perturbed by Ron's slug problem, which Harry hastily explained as he lowered Ron into a chair. "Better out than it," he said cheerfully, plucking a large copper basin in front of him. "Get 'em all up, Ron? I don't think there's anything to do except to wait for it to stop," said Hermione anxiously, watching Ron bend over the basin. "That's a difficult curse to do at the best of time, but with a broken wand." Hagrid was bustling around making them tea. His bored-out Fang was sobbing over Harry. What did Lockhart want with you, Hagrid?" Harry asked, scratching Fang's ear. "Giving me advice on getting kelpies out of well," growled Hagrid, moving a half-plucked rooster off his crumbled table and setting down the teapot. "Like I don't know, and bang on about some banshee he banished. If one word of it was true, I'll eat my kettle." It was most unlikely Hagrid to criticizes a Hogwarts teacher, and Harry looked at him in surprise. Hermione, however, said in a voice somewhat higher than usual, "I think you're being a bit unfair. Professor Dumbledore obviously thought he was the best man for the job." "He was the only man for the job," said Hagrid, offering them a plate of treacle toffee, while Ron coughed squishily in his basin. "And I mean, the only one. Getting very difficult to find one for the Doc Art job. People aren't too keen to take it on. And I mean, the no one lasted long. They started to think it's jinx. No one lasted long for a while now. So tell me," said Hagrid, jerking his head at Ron. "Who was he trying to curse?" "Malfoy," called Hermione something. "It must have been really bad because everyone went mad." Malfoy called Hermione something. "It must have been really bad because everyone went mad." This is Harry word. "It was bad," said Ron hoarsely, emerging over the top table, looking pale and sweaty. "Malfoy would call him mudblood, Harry." Ron dived out of sight again as a fresh wave of slug made their appearance. Hagrid looked outraged. "He didn't," he growled at Hermione. "He did," she said, "but I don't know what it meant. I could tell it was really rude, of course." It's about the most insulting thing he could think of," gasped Ron, coming back up. Mudblood, a really full name for someone who is muggle-born, non-magic parent. There are some wizards like Malfoy family who think they're better than everyone else they're because they're what people call pure blood. He gave a small burp, and a single slug fell into outstretched hand. He threw it into a basin and continued. I mean, the rest of us know it doesn't make any difference at all. Look at Neville of Longbottom. He's a pureblood and he can barely stand a cauldron the right way up. And they haven't invented a spell our Hermione can't do, said Hagrid proudly, making Hermione go brilliant shade of magenta. It's a disgusting thing to call someone, said Ron, whipping out a sweaty blow with a shaking hand. Dirty bloodsy. Come on, common blood. It's mad. Most wizards these days are half blood anyway. If we hadn't married Muggle, we've died out. He retched and ducked out of sight again. I don't blame you for trying to cuss him, Ron, said Hagrid loudly after the thud of more slugs hitting the basin. But maybe it was a good thing your wand backfired. Expect Lucius Malfoy would have come marching up to school if you would curse his son. At least you're not in trouble. Harry would have pointed out that trouble didn't come much worse than having slug pouring out of their mouth, but he couldn't. Hagrid chuckled till he had cemented his jaw together. Harry, said Hagrid suddenly, as though struck by given thought, got a bone to pick with ya. I've heard you've been giving out signed photo. How come I haven't got one? Fierce Harry wrenched his teeth apart. I've not been giving out signed photos, he said haughtily, if Doc are still putting that about. But then he only saw that Hagrid was laughing. I'm only joking, he said, patting Harry gently on his back and sending him face first in the table. I knew you hadn't really. I told Locker you didn't need to. You're more famous than him without trying. Bet he didn't like that, said Harry, sitting up and rubbing his chin. Don't think he did, said Hagrid, his eyes twinkling. And then I told him I'll never read one of his books, and he decided to go. Treacle toffee, Ron? He'd added as Ron reappeared. No thanks, said Ron weakly. Better not risk it. Come on, see what I've been growing. Come on and see what I've been growing, said Hagrid as Harry and Hermione finished the last of their tea. In the small vegetable patch behind Hagrid's house was a dozen largest pumpkin Harry had ever seen. Each was the size of a large boulder. Getting on well, aren't they? Said Hagrid happily. For the Halloween feast should be big enough by then. What have you been feeding them? Said Harry. Hagrid looked over his shoulder to check that they were alone. Oh, I've been giving them, a bit of help. Harry noticed Hagrid's flower pink umbrella leaning against the back wall of the cabin. Harry had not been reason to believe before now that this umbrella was not all it looked. In fact, he had the strong impression that Hagrid's old school wand was concealed inside it. Hagrid wasn't supposed to use magic. He had been expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year, but Harry had never found out why. And he mentioned this matter, and Hagrid would clear his throat loudly and become mysteriously deaf until the subject was changed. The engorgement charm, I suppose, said Hermione halfway between the dismal of amusement. Well, you've done a good job on them. That's what your little sister said, said Hagrid, nodding to Ron. Met her just yesterday. Hagrid looked sideways at Harry, his beard twitching. Said he was just looking around the ground, but I reckon she was hoping she might run into someone else at my house. He winked at Harry. If you ask me, she wouldn't say no to a sign. Oh, shut up, said Harry. Ron snorted with laughter, and the ground was spread with slug. Watch it, Harry, Hagrid roared, pulling Ron away from his precious pumpkin. It was nearly lunchtime, and as Harry had only had one bit of treacle toffee since dawn, he was keen to go back to school and eat. They said goodbye to Hagrid and walked back to the castle, Ron hiccoughing occasionally, but only bring up 2 very small slugs. They had barely set foot in the cold entrance hall when a voice rang out. There you are, Porter Weasley. Professor McGonagall was walking toward them like a stern. You'll both do your detention this evening. But what are we doing? What are we doing, Professor? Said Ron nervously. Suppresses a burp. You'll be polishing the silver in the trophy room with Mr. Filch, said Professor McGonagall. And no magic, Weasley. Elbow grease. Ron gulped. Argus Filch, the caretaker, was loathed by every student in the school, and you, Porter, will be helping Professor Lockhart answer his fan mail, said Professor McGonagall. Oh no, can't I go to do the trophy room too? Said Harry desperately. Certainly not, said Professor McGonagall, raising her eyebrow. Professor Lockhart requests you to particularly. 8 o'clock sharp, both of you. Harry and Ron slouched in a great hall in a state of deepest gloom, Hermione behind them wearing a you did break the rules schools rules sort of expression. Harry didn't fancy shepherd pie as much he would thought. Both he and Ron felt they would got the worst deal. Fitch will have me there all night, said Ron heavily. No magic. There must have about 100 cup in that room. I'm no good at muggle cleaning. I would swap any time, said Harry hollowly. I've had a load of practice with the Dursley. Answering Lockhart fan mail, he'll be a nightmare. Saturday afternoon seemed to melt away in what seemed like no time. It was 5 minutes to 8, and Harry was dragging his feet along the second-floor corridor to Lockhart's office. He gritted his teeth and knocked. The door flew open at once, and Lockhart beamed down it. Here's the scallywag, he said. Come in, Harry, come in. Shining brightly on the wall by the light of many candles were countless framed photographs of Lockhart. He had even signed a few of them. Another large pile lay on his desk. You can address the envelope, Lockhart told Harry, as if there was a huge treat. This first one to Gladys Gudgeon. Bless her, huge fan of mine. The minutes nailed by. Harry let out Lockhart's voice to wash over him, occasionally saying, right, and yeah. And now and then he caught phrases like, fame frickled friend, Harry, or celebrating his celery dust, remember that. The candle burned lower and lower, making the light dance over the many moving face of Lockhart watching him. Harry moved his aching hand over that what he was felt like 1,000 envelope, writing of Veronica's mouthy address. It must be nearly time to leave. Harry thought miserably. Please let it be nearly time. And then he had heard something quite apart from the spitting from dying candles and Lockhart's prattle about his fan. It was a voice to chill the bone marrow, a voice of breathtaking, ice-cold venom. Come to me. Let me rip you. Let me tear you. Let me kill you. Harry gave a huge jump, and large lilac blood appeared on Veronica's smelly street. What? He said loudly. I know, said Lockhart. 6 solid months at the top of the bestseller list. Broke all record. No, said Harry friendly. That voice. Sorry? That Lockhart, looking puzzled. What voice? That voice that said, didn't you hear it? Lockhart was looking at Harry in high astonishment. What are you talking about, Harry? Perhaps you're getting a little drowsy. Great Scott, look at the time. Well, we've been here nearly 4 hours. I'll never have believed it. The time flown, hasn't it? Harry didn't answer. He was straining his ears to hear the voice again, but there was no sound now except for Lockhart telling him he mustn't expect a treat like this every time he got detention. Feeling dazed, Harry left. It was so late that the Gryffindor common room was almost empty. Harry went straight to the dormitory. Ron wasn't back yet. Harry pulled on his pajamas, got into bed, and waited. Half an hour later, Ron arrived, nursing his right arm and bringing a strong smell of polish in the darkened room. "My muscles all seized up," he groaned, sinking into his bed. 14 times he made me buff off the Quidditch cup before he was testified, and I had another slug attack all over a special award for service to school. Took ages to shift the slime. How was it with Lockhart? Keeping his voice low so as not to wake Neville, Dean, and Seamus, Harry told Ron exactly what he had heard. And Lockhart said he couldn't hear it, said Ron. Harry could see him frowning in the moonlight. Do you think he was lying? But I don't get it. Even someone invisible would have had to open the door. I know, said Harry, lying back in the four-poster and staring at the canopy above him. I don't get it either.